You know, folks, there's no doubt about it. Vampires are friggin' awesome. But you have to admit, in recent years, especially in the mass media and pop culture, they've pretty much been given the shaft. One day, Twilight, one day you will be vanquished. However, this phenomenon seems to be linked only with America, as Japan seems to be able to treat their vampires right. What with series like Vampire Princess Miyu, Black Blood Brothers, and Hellsing at least try to dignify the vampires that are in them. The series as a whole might not be that good, but, well, the vampires are still kick-ass. Personally, I find the anime version of Hellsing to be a little overrated, even though I like Hellsing as a character himself. He's about the only good thing that's in that series. But I'm going to steer away from that bonfire for a second so that I can introduce you to today's topic, Rosario+Vampire. Created by Studio Gonzo and based off of a manga by the same name, this 13-episode series is one of the more polarizing that I've seen. Fans of the manga deride it, and people who see it by themselves say that it has its good points and its bad points. Personally, I can't really judge it based off of the manga since I've only read the first 2 volumes. So I was pretty much going into this pretty fresh, so let's take a look. So the story centers around Sukune Aono, a young man who is very middle of the road in almost every single way. He was average in popularity, average in athletic ability, average in academics. Pretty much just your average all-around guy. Quite nice, but very dull in some aspects. So dull, in fact, that he actually flunked out of all of his high school entrance exams, and it seems like the rest of his class will be moving on without him. However, by fate or design, he actually ends up at a school for, get this, yukai, or Japanese monsters. Now at first, Sukune wants to get the heck out of there, and rightfully so, seeing as how any other student at that school could rip his friggin' head off. That is, of course, until he meets her.
I'm not paralyzed, but I seem to be struck by you. I wanna make you move, because you're standing still. If your body matches what your eyes can do, you'll probably move right through me on my way to you.
Actually, folks, this pink-haired beauty happens to be our vampire, Mocha. She quickly becomes Sukune's best friend, despite his status as being human, who is not really supposed to be at the school in the first place. She also seems to have a very, very disturbing obsession with his blood, which lends itself to seeing this shot quite a bit. Now, I suppose that's the animator's way of showing us that she's sucking his blood, but in reality, all I can really think about is, well, the opening to the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Science fiction. Double feature.
Now, it's constantly exposited within the first episode that vampires are viewed as the most powerful monsters of all. However, Mocha, even though she is a vampire, does not seem to fit this description at all. She's rather clumsy, slightly ditzy, but very caring and good-natured. In fact, she seems like one of the perfect girls that any guy would be glad to have around their shoulder. However, all of that changes when Sukune accidentally removes the Rosario around her neck, releasing the inner Mocha, a demonic and devilish vampire, which is her true self, or at least her true fighting spirit. Oh, and by the way, every time we do this in every episode, we get a transformation sequence. Now, despite the fact that this is more of a harem anime rather than a magical girl anime, and there is the fact that it has slightly more darker and more provocative subject matter in it than most other transformation sequences, I still find myself thinking about Sailor Moon every time I see it.
Fighting evil by moonlight, winning love by daylight, never running from a real fight. She is the one named Sailor Moon.
Huh. You know, we're still on the first episode of this series, and so far all it's done is made me want to watch other anime and movies. Well, that's pretty much the extent of the plot, and the premise doesn't get much deeper than that, and from there the plot just follows a very Monster of the Week formula. As for the characters themselves, well, there is a slew of secondary characters besides Sukune and Mocha, but they mostly just exist to fill in the stereotypes of a harem anime, and to generally provide fan service, conflict, and some extra personality so that we don't get bored with the constant on-again, off-again relationship between Mocha the vampire and Sukune the human. Now, even if you've only read the first volume of the manga, you already know that these characters are going to get way better development there than in this anime. But that being said, let's take a look at just how stereotypical they are, just in case you think I was being facetious before. First off, there's the experiment in jiggle physics known as Kurumu, who is a literal succubus who exists primarily to be Mocha's main competition when it comes to Sukune's affections. She also only really wants to bone the poor kid because she cares about the continuation of her species and she needs to find her special soulmate, which she believes him to be, in order to procreate and continue the race. Well, in other words, her entire character can be summed up like this.
My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard and they're like, it's better than yours. Damn right, it's better than yours. I could teach you, but I have to charge. My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard and they're like, it's better than yours.
Next up is the walking fan service for every single pedophile in the audience, Yukari. She's an 11-year-old prodigy witch who was sent to this school because in this world, witches are viewed as something in between monsters and humans. Very similar to both, and yet not really accepted by either. As far as personality goes, she's pretty much a brat to everyone except Mocha and exists generally to be antagonistic to everybody who tries to get close to her, and, oh my. Folks, please allow me to remind you that that's an 11-year-old girl that's doing that. Fuck! And finally, to round off our harem, we have Mizori-chan, who is your typical, slightly emotionless stalker-esque character, always popping up whenever she's not wanted, never really showing much emotion unless she's really driven to it, and she's yet again another person who is completely obsessed with trying to mate with Tsunuke. Dear God, this guy gets more ass than Hugh Hefner! So those 5 serve as our main characters for a majority of the series, but there are quite a few others such as Nekonome-sensei, Gin-senpai, and this strange bus driver that shows up every now and then. However, they don't have really enough screen time to be considered anything other than exposition devices, or at best, comic relief. Now with that being said, let's move into the area of animation. If you know Gonzo Studios, then you know that, well, they can be very polarizing and very flighty with their animation budget, and this one is no exception. For the most part, I will say that the animation is fairly decent. Now, when I say it's decent, that's still being pretty generous. While the character and background animations are fairly consistent in that the models never really change much, there's still quite a bit wrong with it. You'll never really see more than one person moving on the screen at once, and when you do see them move, they still seem a little stiff. Even worse than that, the show constantly relies on stock animation, still frames, and close-ups, whether it's on just one body part or a character's face, to save on the animation budget. Now, another thing that really ticks me off is the fact that you can tell pretty easily that every single building, and even the floors that the characters are walking on, most of the time, are obvious CG. Now, that's another Gonzo standard, as are most of the complaints that I'm making about this animation. However, like I said, the characters are fairly well animated and at least look pretty nice. They're not horrible to look at. And there are also 2 other areas where you can really tell a lot of the animation budget went. The first of which you see every time Kurumu is on camera. They have breasts the likes of which not even God has seen. And the other part is during the fight scenes between Inner Mocha and whatever enemy they happen to be fighting that week. These are probably the best parts of any anime of this genre, and it definitely says a lot to Gonzo's credit. However, they're incredibly short, which is very disappointing. Actually, it's only ever really the finishing blow that's really animated well, and the fights are so short that we actually have a little flying stopwatch come in every time a fight is finished just to tell us how short the fight was this week.
今週の決着わずか57秒でしたでちゅー
Oh, this seems as good a place to mention it as any. This series